Got the pink Freddy shirt out, so you know what that means. Time for a horror movie review, or really a series of reviews, I should say. Let's get into it. So after I finished binge watching the Chucky series, I got in the mood to rewatch all the Chucky movies, especially since as of November, it is the 35th anniversary of the original Child's Play. So let's start with that. And we all know the plot of Child's Play. It's about Charles Lee Ray. He's getting chased down by the police. He gets shot. He is dying. And so he does some voodoo shit to possess his soul into the good guy doll. And now he is a killer doll that comes across Andy. He starts killing people left and right, including Andy's babysitter. He finally reveals himself to Andy's mother. The majority of the movie at that point is just Andy and his mom trying to convince everybody that the Chucky doll is possessed. And Chucky getting more and more humor as he stays in the doll body. And so he wants to put his soul into Andy's body. Now, I do like the earlier films, especially that first film, because there are comedic elements in the movie, but it leaned more so towards the horror slasher. It is definitely more scary because we all know that iconic scene where the mother is trying to get Chucky to talk, and when he does talk, it is some of the most scary and yet hilarious thing ever.
I said talk to me, damn it, or else I'm gonna throw you in the fire!
You stupid bitch, you filthy slut! Did you fuck with me?
And I just love the horror aspect of it. And I also like the fact that this movie was made in the late 80s because the late 80s aesthetic just adds to it. And I love how they brought Chucky to life using the animatronics and puppetry and even some short body doubles. Shout out to Tony Garner. If you've learned from Living with Chucky, he was one of the puppeteers and animatronic operators for Chucky. Child's Play easily gets the hands up emoji because it is a masterpiece. Next up is Child's Play 2, in which Chucky is brought back to life after they took that same Chucky body, put him back together, and through some lucky lightning, Chucky is brought back to life. And so he is on a revenge path to find Andy and again put his soul in his body. But unlike the first movie, everybody thinks Andy and his mom is cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs because of that whole story. And so his mom gets put in a mental hospital. Andy is in a foster care in which he gets a big foster sister. And that's where we meet Kyle, played by Christine Ellis. Now, what I like about Child's Play 2 is how it builds off of the first movie, in which it progresses. Andy, they gave him a sister, or foster sister, I should say, but Chucky is back, and Chucky wants revenge, and Andy is trying to warn everybody, including his foster parents, about this, but again, they are just not believing it, and so it just puts Andy in this stressful situation until Kyle, she gets weaved into all this and she realizes what's happening, and so it gives Andy a companion. And I also just loved the bond between Andy and Kyle, which clearly carried over into the future of this franchise. We even get more Chucky in this movie, and it has the right balance between the horror and the comedy, and Chucky is more hilarious in this movie than he was in the first film. Brad Dourif, who I forgot to mention to talk about in the first film, he brings his character to life, but we all know that this is his character, and you can tell Brad Dourif, he is just having fun playing this character. This is probably one of my favorite climaxes in any of this movie, in which it takes place in a factory, the Good Guy Doll factory, because apparently every climax of every movie from the late 80s and early 90s had to take place in a factory. Now, you may disagree with me, and that's totally fine, but for me, I just have more fun watching Child's Play 2 than I did Child's Play because of how it builds off of the first film and puts Andy in just this stressful situation. Chucky is even better than he was in the first film, and that's why I give Child's Play 2 the hands up emoji, because I also think is a masterpiece. Next up is Child's Play 3, which is very different from the first two films. And it takes place years into the future, in which Andy, he is a little bit older. He gets tired from living from foster home to foster home, so he goes to this military school. But Chucky's blood gets mixed in with all the plastic mold or liquid, whatever that was. Chucky comes back to life and again is on revenge for Andy. So Andy, he has to confront Chucky again and get everybody he knows in the military to rally up against Chucky. Now, clearly, this movie is the weakest of, that original Child's Play trilogy. Now, I understand the studio wanted to age Andy up a bit, but this movie was made a year after Child's Play 2. And Alex Vincent, who plays Andy in Child's Play 2, was still a little boy at the time, so they went and got a different actor. But even still, I still don't understand why they needed to do that. It was just jarring. Regardless, the person they got to play a little older Andy was okay. But honestly, the kid's nature of this movie works for Chucky because Chucky can easily try to manipulate kids, which is an idea that they clearly realized for the Chucky series, which is why it was not a very good idea to age them up. Though this movie does bring me my favorite Chucky line.
I got some fresh meat lined up and I'm not gonna let you spoil it, not this time.
Tyler.
Yeah, just think, Chucky's gonna be a bro.
Now, the military school is admittedly a nice setting to put Chucky in, because it gives Chucky an advantage to use weapons and resources that he's never used to kill people. And I like how it was also a callback into Chucky Season 2, in which the school that the three main kids go to, it was a military school, but then it got turned into a Catholic school or religious school, whatever it was. But overall, I just don't like this movie because of how it ended too quick. It felt like the movie just went from point A to point B to point C, D, or whatever, and it just ended. We really didn't get no real resolution with this movie, let alone a resolution for what was the original Child's Play trilogy. But regardless, I still have fun with this one. I'm going to give Child's Play 3 the thumbs up emoji. Now we're done with the Child's Play trilogy era. Now let's get into the Tiffany Jennifer Tilly duology, starting with Bride of Chucky, which came out 10 years after the original Child's Play. Tiffany is a former lover of Charles Lee Ray, who is Chucky. She finds all the Chucky parts after Chucky got blown up at the end of the last film through police evidence. She stitches them back together, brings them back to life with a book called Voodoo for Dummies. I kid you not. It comes back to life. They have a little verbal squabble, and Chucky turns Tiffany into a doll just like her, and they go on this journey in which the two of them are trying to find human bodies to possess their souls in. Now, I did like how this movie is a nice little reinvention of the Chucky franchise, in which they made it somewhat of a dark comedy. But they also still kept the horror slasher elements in this movie, which was a nice little balance and a nice little way to reinvent this series. Jennifer Tilly, she is great in this movie. She's a nice little yin to Chucky's yang. When she's in human form, she is excellent. But then once she gets into the doll form, it's like her and Chucky are like freaking frack. But what I also like about their dynamic is how it illustrates the toxic elements of their relationship. And it also adds an extra layer to Chucky, because we clearly see that Chucky, through the way he treats Tiffany, he is a narcissist. He is toxic as hell. But then again, that's what happens when you have a crazy serial killer. They only think of themselves, and because of that, they tend to be narcissists and not really realizing what they're doing to hurt the person that they claim to love. And even though she does find herself back to Chucky in almost any Chucky movie or show, she does eventually realizes this about Chucky and goes against him at times, when it benefits her, that is. My only real gripe about this movie is some of the human characters. But the only real standout human characters in this movie is Katherine Heigl, a very young Katherine Heigl. I remember the first time I watched this, I saw her and I'm like, hey, that's the girl from Knocked Up. She has somewhat of a chip on her shoulder, and she finds herself in trouble when dead bodies just keep happening pertaining to her and her boyfriend. But it's really Chucky and Tiffany. Another acting standout to me is John Ritter, who is, I guess, the guardian of Katherine Heigl's character. And anytime I see a movie with John Ritter, I'm reminded that he is no longer with us. And for the limited time he has in this movie, I felt they utilized him excellently. The kills in this movie are, it's not a Chucky movie without the kills, and the kills in this movie are just, And this movie gave me my favorite Chucky laugh.
What are you, fucking nuts? You thought?
I'm gonna give Bride of Chucky the hard eyes emoji. Then there is Seed of Chucky, which is without a doubt the worst of this series. At the end of Bride of Chucky, Tiffany has a baby. That baby gets adopted and held in captivity, slavery. The title character, the Seed of Chucky, is named Glenn, who is gender confused, so it could be Glenn or it could be Glenda. But this movie was surprisingly progressive at the time, which I'll get more into in a little bit. But Glenn, he searches for his parents, who turns out to be Chucky and Tiffany. They're making a Hollywood movie about the killings of Chucky and Tiffany. I'm a little confused. They try to act like this really didn't happen or try to capitalize on the Annie story. We don't know. This is the point where the franchise really started to lose its marbles. But the point is, Glenn finds Chucky and Tiffany with a necklace that he found. He brings them back to life, and now they're just one big, twisted, happy family. Tiffany, who is actually played by Jennifer Tilly, in which Jennifer Tilly, she's playing two different roles in this movie, herself and the Tiffany doll. She wants to possess her soul into Jennifer Tilly and whatever guy Chucky comes across. But not before she impregnates Jennifer Tilly so that Glenn may have a body to go into. But that's pretty much the movie. Now, like I said, this is the worst in the series, but that doesn't mean I hate it. I do remember, I think this was probably like my first anything I watched with Chucky in it. But even before then, I only knew about Chucky in the movies because I used to watch VH1's The 80s Were Awesome, whatever it was called. They talked about the Chucky movies, and so I never came across the movies, but then this was the first Chucky movie I watched all the way through. It was on HBO and Cinemax back in the day. I watched it, thought it was funny, but then I watched the other movies eventually and had more fun with those than I did with this one. But the main problem with Seed of Chucky is that it really truly is a dark comedy. There's really no horror slasher elements in this movie. This is the point of the franchise where they went completely off the rails, and it is now a comedy. Now, it does have some funny moments in it for sure, particularly when Chucky kills Britney Spears.
Yeah, my boy inside. Let's ride till the wheels fall off.
Oops, I did it again.
Another favorite Chucky moment of mine is during the climax of the movie where Chucky just finally decides, fuck it. I'm tired of trying to possess my soul into a human body. I'm better off like this. I am Chucky, the killer doll. They do explore something in here in which Chucky and Tiffany, they're trying to stop killing, but as we all know, that doesn't really go right. But the progressive thing about Glenn is that it was kind of the first representation for trans people in which Glenn, he doesn't know if he's a boy or a girl. So hence why you have Glenn or Glenda. Now, all that was cool and all, but overall, Seed of Chucky, like I said, is the worst of the series, but it does have its moments here and there. And that's why I give Seed of Chucky the shoulder shrug emoji. And finally, we are into the Nika duology with Curse of Chucky, in which, after the Fairies of Seed of Chucky, the franchise was in limbo for a long time, but then Dom Mancini, he finally picked it back up and decided to be like Norman Osborn in that original Spider-Man trilogy.
Back to formula.
In which he finally goes back to the horror slasher roots of this franchise, and it worked and succeeded for this movie. Even though this movie and the next movie after it went straight to video, this movie reignited the Chucky fans, got people interested in this franchise again. We follow a new person, Nika, who is a paraplegic. She is wheelchair bound. She gets sent the Chucky doll, not knowing that that is Charles Lee Ray inside the Chucky doll. And so he kills her mother. The rest of her family comes in for town for the funeral, and they all trying to figure out what to do with Nika, but Nika is trying to prove that she's clearly capable. But the Chucky doll, again, he comes back to life and starts killing and fucking shit up. And so now it is Nika versus Chucky, and then we find out eventually how Chucky fits into her family history. And spoiler alert, Charles Lee Ray was the neighbor of Nika's family before Nika was even born. He takes her mother, ties her up, kills her husband, and before Nika is even born, he stabs the knife through her mother's baby bump and basically paralyzes the baby from the neck down while the baby is still in the womb. Now, I like Nika, well, one, because she is played by Brad Dourif's own daughter, Fiona Dourif. Now, I will definitely say about Nika, with rewatching these movies, she is definitely the one character that Nika has done the most damage to, and I will tell you why once I get into Call of Chucky, but her journey really started here. Now, of course, this movie brings Chucky back to his roots, but it also doesn't ignore the other movies. Like Jennifer Tilly, she makes an appearance at the end of the movie, and then we even get an end credit scene with a much older Andy. And Chucky thinks he's about to get the drop on Andy, but then turns out, nah, Andy's getting the drop on Chucky. I like how this movie was basically the start of furthering this franchise, but also bringing the franchise back to its roots. Now, it may not be the best in the series, but it definitely brought the Chucky franchise back on track. And that's why I'm going to give Curse of Chucky the hard eyes emoji. Now, Call of Chucky was also released straight to video, but it furthers the story of Nika. At the end of Curse of Chucky, she gets sent to a psychiatric ward because of all the Chucky killings. She's trying really hard to prove to everybody that what happened to her actually happened, but nobody's having it. Everybody thinks she's crazy. But meanwhile, Chucky has his own plan to possess his soul into multiple Chucky dolls, pretty much creating a Chucky army. Now, Andy, who got reintroduced in the end credit scene of the last movie, he comes in, he finds out about this. He has a Chucky head trapped, and so he tries to go to that mental ward to save Nika, and hopefully they can team up and go against all these multiple Chuckies. Jennifer Tilly, she's also in on it. You would think all these things coming together will make for a fun Chucky movie, right? No, not necessarily. It had a great concept, but horrible execution. Therefore, ultimately, how I feel about Cult of Chucky is it was underwhelming and weird, because it had a great concept with all these multiple Chuckies, but they didn't really go anywhere with it, and where they went with it was quite underwhelming and weird. And I say it's weird because, spoiler alert, Chucky possesses his soul into Nika, and Nika drives off with Jennifer Tilly. Now, I say this is weird because, one, that is Brad Dourif's actual daughter, and Chucky putting his soul into Nika, and father, daughter, you know where I'm going with this. And on top of that, Chucky, he is now a female, a paraplegic female, I must say. And because he possessed her soul, she can now walk all of a sudden. And because he put his soul into Nika, he reunites with Jennifer Tilly, and they have this weird relationship going, because Chucky and Tiffany, they used to be lovers, but now Chucky is a female. Like, what were the writers smoking when they made this? In the end, I think they had a great concept, but where they went with it was just weird and underwhelming. Fiona Dourif, she is still great in this movie. And to further elaborate on when I said that Nika is the one character that Chucky has done the most damage to, because I totally forgot to say that, but sometimes I just have my notes down, and sometimes I forget to talk about something and I just go on babbling. But anyways, what I mean when I said that Nika is the one character Chucky has done the most damage to is because you gotta think about it. First, he made her paralyzed while she was still in the mother's womb, killed her mother, killed her entire family, had her put in a mental hospital, possessed her body, and even though this technically wasn't Chucky's fault, but Tiffany chopped off all her limbs. This girl just can't catch a break. And that's why I say Nika is the one character Chucky has done the most damage to. I do like that they continue the horror aspect of it, especially since this movie takes place in a psychiatric ward, which would definitely add to a movie of this magnitude. They do a little bit more with Jennifer Tilly in this movie, given that she's in on the plot that Chucky is doing in this movie. They definitely do a lot more with Andy in this movie. And I even like the end credits scene in which Kyle returns, played once again by Christine Ellis, which means that they're finding more ways to bring back characters from the original movies and also furthering this story arc, which they clearly continue in the Chucky series. But too bad we had to go through a remake before we get to the Chucky series. But more on that in like literally a couple of seconds. I'm going to give Cult of Chucky the shoulder shrug emoji. Now again, before they made the Chucky series, there was a remake that came out in 2019. It is not made by the same creative crew that made the original movies with Brad Dourif. It is now made by a completely different team. Mark Hamill, he plays the voice of Chucky, and the Chucky doll, he's not even possessed by a human. It is just an AI doll, and the only reason it turns evil, well, for one, you would think because it's a movie with artificial intelligence, the doll is just going to automatically turn evil at some point, right? But really what happened was one of the dolls that's being manufactured by someone in the Buddy Doll factory is a disgruntled employee that is getting mistreated and abused by his boss. So he takes out all the safety defaults out of the Chucky doll, package it, kills himself, and that Chucky doll is out, and it comes across this version of Andy, who is not a little boy. He is now a teenager. His mother is played by Aubrey Plaza, and the cop in this movie is played by Brian Tyree Henry. Now, in theory, this movie could have worked with the different take that they're going with Child's Play, but at the same time, it takes away from what made Child's Play so good in the first place, in which it is some serial killer possessing his soul into a Chucky doll and just turning Chucky into a evil AI doll. Is just not as scary. I mean, don't get me wrong, it would be scary if I had an AI doll that all of a sudden just started killing people. Don't get it twisted. That will be scary, but in terms of movie form, it's just not as scary. And in theory, Mark Hamill would make an excellent Chucky doll, just not the Chucky that he played in this movie. But for what Mark Hamill was given in this movie, he did fine. He just didn't do all the Brad Dourif isms that made Chucky's so iconic, which is fine, because you don't want to do anything too similar to Brad Dourif's version, but at the same time, what Mark Hamill did, it just doesn't measure up to what Brad Dourif brought to Chucky. The kills are still there, in fact, a little bloodier than some of the original movies, I might say. It does play on the tension of these things happening to Andy, and he is trying to convince everybody, but of course, nobody believes him and thinks he's being crazy. And when shit does hit the fan, it is bloody gruesome. And really, in retrospect, this movie basically walked so that Megan can run. In the end, nothing's ever gonna make me forget the original Child's Play, and for a long time, I did think this movie just wasn't really that good, but then after rewatching it, I'm like, okay, it's not as bad as I remember, but it's still not as good as some of those original movies. And it's a nice and noble take on the Child's Play mythology, but it just doesn't have all the elements that made Child's Play so good and iconic. And understand, this is me being generous. I'm going to give Child's Play 2019 the shoulder shrug emoji. But that's my take on the entire Chucky franchise, and I really mean that. I've reviewed every movie, I've reviewed the show, and I reviewed the documentary. This is how I rank all the Chucky movies, courtesy of Letterboxd. Thank you so much for watching. What do you think of all the Chucky movies? What's your favorite one, and how do you rank all of them? Let me know in the comment section below.